Hi, welcome to Books with Lexie. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 6 recommendations for books with podcast elements. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe. I post 2 to 3 videos a week and host reading sprints as well. I'm really excited to be sharing these recommendations with you. Books with podcasts have quickly become one of my favorite things. It has been a fairly recent trend, and I think it is becoming even more popular. So here are 6 ones I think you should start with. These are all in the mystery, thriller, kind of horror category, and all of these books are 4 and 5 stars for me. It is interesting because half of these are YA. I'm not even a big YA reader, but these are some of my favorite YA books. So maybe I need to read more YA with podcast elements in them. Interesting. Never thought about that before. So I'm going to start off with a 4-star book for me. This is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This is the first in a trilogy. I have only personally read this one, but we are following our main character, Pip. She is a senior in high school, yes, and she is working on her final project where she is investigating a closed case that happened in her hometown. 5 years ago, a popular girl named Andy was murdered by her boyfriend, Sal. He ended up committing suicide because of this, and it was like the talk of the town. So she ends up linking up with Sal's brother to do some investigation. The podcast in here isn't like a published real podcast. It is mixed media that is her journal entries and interviews and stuff, like transcripts of interviews. So for this, the audio is really good. So we get the transcript of the conversations she's having. It's really interesting, and it reads like a podcast. So while this one is kind of cheating a little bit, I think this is still good if you like podcasts in your books. The next recommendation is Sadie by Courtney Summers. This one is so popular. So many people have read it, and I feel like this is one that not started the podcast trend, but was a big influence on it. So this is following a radio personality, and he starts this podcast about this case. So Sadie went missing a few years ago, I think, and she was hunting down the person that murdered her younger sister. So in this book, we are getting alternating perspectives between Sadie in the past as she is on the hunt for this person, and then also the transcripts from the podcast. This is a story of relationships between sisters and how important they are, and also revenge. So this is what the podcast part looks like in this book. Once again, would really recommend the audio for this. So that is my second recommendation. And then the third book I have to talk to you about is a recent release. This is still YA, and this is a thriller/horror. This is The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a Carrie by Stephen King retelling, but this also adds in elements of racism in school, and it turns the newspaper articles and all that stuff into a podcast in here. So we're getting different chapters, one following the podcast of somebody trying to prove that Maddie, the main character in here, was the one that caused all of this damage that we know happened. And then also, as this is happening in real time, the bullying, the racism that Maddie deals with, which leads up to the big event that happens at prom. This I personally loved more than Carrie. I even have a signed copy. I read Carrie last year, and I gave it 3 stars. I didn't love it. I personally think that this really added to the story. I liked the podcast. This audiobook, absolutely incredible. There's sound effects and a bunch of stuff. In here, we're getting perspectives of multiple different people during the Maddie timeline story. And then the podcast kind of looks like this. We are getting the transcripts from the podcast, and he's trying to prove that Maddie did it and interviewing people. He's trying to convince this one lady that Maddie did it. So this is my third podcast book recommendation, and this one is the last YA book. Next, I'm going to talk about an adult book that was published this year, and this is Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. This is following our main character, Paris. She, at the very beginning, is arrested in her house. She's bloody. She's holding a razor over the body of her dead husband, but she claims she did not do it. She also does not want to come clean because she does not want secrets from her past to come up. She is like way more scared of that than going to jail for murder. And then we are also following 25 years earlier, Ruby, who was convicted of a similar murder in a trial. And Ruby knows Paris's secrets, so we are watching these two stories come together. The podcast in here is never like a transcript type thing, I don't think. We are watching the character who runs the podcast interacting with Paris and their conversations that he then puts into his podcast. So we don't get specific podcast elements, but we are getting the creation of the podcast in here, which I think is an interesting take on it. I really enjoyed this book and I give it 4 stars. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Night Swim by Megan Golden. Is this the same cover as the last one? Yes. Look at this. Anyway, The Night Swim, I loved when I read it. The audio for this one is really good. Also, I do want to mention that The Weight of Blood, Things We Do in the Dark, The Night Swim, and the last one I'm going to talk about are very dark, so please look into them more to decide if it's something that you want to read, but they all definitely deal with very dark subject matter. Speaking of dark subject matter, this is following a true crime podcast host. She is switching from doing like cold cases to covering a current case, and she is going to cover the case of a rape trial. So we are following her doing the investigation on this, and also she starts getting these weird notes telling her to investigate this case that happened in the past. We are getting small town issues. We are getting issues with athletes and their careers being prioritized over anyone else. And also the whole situation that happened in the past with just people going missing and issues with that. This one was really interesting. I enjoyed the podcast elements in this. So that's what it looks like. It is the transcript of the podcast that she is reading. So the audiobook is great because it is done like a podcast. Highly recommend this one. And then the last one, my personal favorite from this list, but I really love all of them. This is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. This is one of the darkest books I have ever read. It comes with a list of content warnings at the very beginning, so that's important to know. So we are following our main character at the very beginning. She is listening to the podcast that is done by her friend from high school, and in that podcast he's talking about the death of someone she was friends with in college, and she just finds out that she has apparently committed suicide, but the podcast host does not believe that is the case and pretty much reaches out to her saying, if you are listening, contact me. So she does this. So in here we are getting the very dark, disturbing past of our main character. She is relaying it to our podcast host as part of the podcast to help investigate what is going on now. They are going around trying to figure out what's happening. They're putting the pieces together as we are learning about her past, and she pretty much is willing to do whatever it takes to kind of make up for her past decisions. So there's a lot in here about trauma. There's a lot in here about misogyny and like men being better, and like this ends up investigating a cult. That's in the synopsis, not a spoiler. It's just so dark, but it's so important and done well, and I'm obsessed with this book. So those are the 6 podcast books I have to recommend to you today. I would love to know if you've read any of these and what you thought, or if you have any other podcast book recommendations. If you are looking for more horror and thriller recommendations in the future, make sure you hit the notification bell because there will be more to come on my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye!